Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente et distingués membres du Conseil de sécurité, je suis reconnaissant de cette opportunité de mettre à jour les conseils sur les derniers développements concernant la mise en œuvre de l'accord final de paix de 2016, ainsi que d'autres efforts en cours pour consolider la paix en Colombie. Es un honor para mí, señora Presidenta, estar acompañado nuevamente por el canciller Luis Gilberto Murillo. Quiero agradecer al Gobierno de Colombia, a través de él, su invaluable apoyo y colaboración con la misión de verificación. Quisiera reconocer además la presencia en su delegación del ministro del Interior, Juan Fernando Cristo, quien desempeña nuevas y muy importantes responsabilidades para impulsar la implementación del Acuerdo de Paz. Saludo también al consejero comisionado para la Paz, Oti Patiño, quien lidera las diferentes mesas de diálogo dentro de la política de paz total. Me complace contar también una vez más en esta sala con la presencia de Diego Tobar, en representación de la otra parte signataria del acuerdo, en clara muestra de la fortaleza de este proceso donde antiguos adversarios ahora trabajan como socios en la construcción de paz en Colombia. También doy la bienvenida a Beatriz Quintero, fundadora de la Red Nacional de Mujeres de Colombia. Ella y su organización han desempeñado un papel fundamental en la promoción de la participación de las mujeres en los esfuerzos de consolidación de la paz, incluido el diseño del próximo Plan de Acción Nacional sobre la Resolución 1325 sobre Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad. Madam President, members of the Council, the current administration is the third to shoulder the responsibility for the implementation of the peace agreement. With 2 years remaining in its term, and as the 8th anniversary of the peace agreement approaches next month, historic progress has been made, but much more remains to be done. I am pleased, therefore, to report that since the Security Council last convened on Colombia in July, with the participation of President Petro, we have seen follow-through on steps announced at that time that signal an important recentering of the peace agreement at the heart of the peace policy of the government. The Rapid Response Plan, or Plan de Choque, being developed by the Minister of the Interior, with inputs from comunes, local authorities, and communities in conflict-affected regions, is a new instrument that should serve to energize implementation. I had the honor to join the Minister in several of his visits to these regions, including Cauca and Putumayo, where I heard the urgent plea by these communities for development projects, public investments, and services. I greatly appreciate these and other opportunities afforded to the mission to accompany this process and to offer recommendations on how and where to focus efforts that could inject renewed momentum. I welcome initial indications that the plan will focus strongly on rural reform in order to transform the conflict-affected regions as well as on strengthening security guarantees. I welcome that Council members will have the opportunity today to hear directly from the government about the scope of the plan and its expected impact on the ground. Madam President, the peace architecture established under the final agreement, especially the Commission for the Follow-up, Promotion, and Verification of the final agreement, has a key role to play in any successful effort to accelerate its implementation. The recent joint meeting of the National Commission on Security Guarantees and the high-level unit of the Comprehensive Security System for the Exercise of Politics, chaired by President Petro, led to important decisions on the rollout of the policy on the dismantling of illegal armed groups and criminal organizations. These include the identification of several priority regions where insecurity is acute and where this policy can help to bring improvement in the situation. Madam President, As reflected in the latest report of the Secretary General, we remain encouraged by the government's commitment to advancing the rural reform chapter of the agreement. Provisions that have a transformative potential, attacking structural causes of the conflict, but which had lagged in their implementation in previous years. Day by day, for example, more land is being distributed and formalized for those in need, bringing the promised benefits of peace to landless peasants and those dispossessed of it during the conflict. However, despite this and other welcome progress towards the transformation of the territories, the result to date, as recognized by the government itself, are still modest in relation to the overarching goals established under the peace agreement. I am also concerned about reports that peasants' organizations working to advance rural reform have been receiving threats from illegal armed groups in different regions of the country. Much more also must be done to advance the ethnic chapter of the accord, designed to bring the benefits of peace to Afro-Colombians and indigenous communities to redress the disproportionate impact of the conflict on them and to ensure their participation. Whereas progress has remained limited overall, I hope that the promulgation last week of a decree to strengthen the ability of Vice President Francia Marquez to carry out her leading role in guiding this key area of the agreement will contribute to more tangible progress. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, it was not preordained that the Colombia's peace process would set a global standard for the inclusion of women in a peace process and for the incorporation of a specific gender-related provisions in a peace agreement. This only happened because Colombia's women's leaders, such as Beatriz Quintero, with us today, organized and demanded that it be so. I greatly value my regular meetings with these leaders and organizations and the engagement with them by the mission throughout its work. I assure you that women's voices continue to be heard very strongly as they advocate for greater progress overall and in implementation of the gender provisions of the agreement, and for the effective inclusion of women in the dialogue processes underway. Madam President, members of the Council, regarding transitional justice, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace continued to take forward its pioneering work so central to the transition from war to peace. The country remains expectant as to the coming stages of the process, especially the issuance of its first sentences to those responsible for serious crimes. The SJP success will lie in achieving a delicate balance between multiple elements, which include the rights of the victims and the legal security of those under its jurisdiction, as well as the rigor and celerity with which it will be able to proceed and dispatch justice. The government also bears an important responsibility to ensure that all necessary conditions are in place for the practical implementation of the sentences once issued. Amidst continuous debates, at times public, over aspects of its proceedings, constructive dialogue between the various stakeholders remain paramount, along with respect for its autonomy and independence. The mission remains available to all concerned to continue to facilitate such dialogue. Across all areas of the peace agreement, adequate financing is a basic condition for consolidating and expanding upon progress. I am concerned in this regard that resources for peace priorities could be impacted by general fiscal constraints that appears to be looming over the budget for the government for the year ahead. With understanding, but also a conviction that peace cannot be shortchanged, I trust that every effort will be made, despite those limitations, to ensure that critical resources for peace implementation are protected in the national budget. And I call for the international community to continue to fill critical gaps with its continued assistance. Señora Presidenta, distinguidos miembros del Consejo. La compleja situación de seguridad en varias regiones del país sigue constituyendo uno de los mayores obstáculos para la consolidación de la paz. En algunos territorios, las y los firmantes del acuerdo y los líderes sociales siguen siendo el blanco de violencia, presiones y amenazas por parte de actores armados que luchan por el control territorial y por rutas estratégicas vinculadas a economías ilícitas. Desde el inicio del proceso de reincorporación, 5 antiguos espacios territoriales de capacitación y reincorporación han tenido que ser reubicados por estas razones, siendo el último de ellos el emblemático espacio de Miravalle en el departamento del Caquetá. La difícil situación en algunas zonas sigue impactando la vida de las comunidades que quedan en medio del fuego cruzado y sujetos a fenómenos condenables como el reclutamiento de menores, el desplazamiento y el confinamiento. Preocupan también los nuevos fenómenos de control social, en particular sobre mujeres y niñas. Escuché testimonios dolorosos sobre mujeres a las que se les dicta inclusive cómo deben vestirse o el color de uñas que deben pintarse. La complejidad y la fluidez de las dinámicas de conflicto en varias regiones y la inseguridad que produce para las poblaciones afectadas requiere un abordaje integral y complementario. Por un lado, es necesario avanzar en la implementación efectiva de las disposiciones de garantías de seguridad del Acuerdo Final de Paz y, por otro lado, dar seguimiento a las medidas acordadas en las distintas mesas de diálogos de paz orientadas a reducir la violencia y proteger a la población civil. Al mismo tiempo, es importante disminuir la violencia entre actores armados y legales para el beneficio último de las comunidades. Asimismo, una aplicación efectiva de las políticas de seguridad es complementaria a las iniciativas de diálogo como parte de una mayor presencia estatal en todas sus dimensiones en las regiones más afectadas. Madam President, members of the Council, despite a series of challenges, the government is persisting in its effort to broaden the scope of peace through various dialogue initiatives. The state of the dialogues and the good offices provided by myself and my team to those processes with groups of a political nature are presented in the latest report of the Secretary General. Of utmost concern has been the months-long stalemate in the talks between the government and the ELN, leading to the expiration of their bilateral ceasefire in August. Sadly, since the parties returned to armed confrontation, there has been a doubling of the numbers of death and wounded persons on both sides compared to the entire year during which the ceasefire was in effect. Amid mutual recriminations, trust, unfortunately, has been lost. I am encouraged, nevertheless, by the statements by both parties a few days ago, expressing their willingness to meet to examine ways to overcome the current deadlock. I trust that the parties will use that opportunity to begin to regain momentum in a process that has advanced promisingly before this latest impasse. It is our hope also that the parties will resume negotiations and reestablish and strengthen their ceasefire in order to save lives, rebuild confidence at the peace table, and enable the implementation of other areas of progress such as the agreement on the participation of the society in the peace process. It will be important for the verification mission to retain its readiness in this context as we continue to keep the Council informed on developments. We also continue through the good offices to accompany dialogues initiatives with the two armed groups deriving from the former FARC-EP. We welcome the announcement made by the Peace Commissioner of the expected extension as of tomorrow for 6 additional months of the bilateral ceasefire with the structures of the group known as the Estado Mayor Central FARC-EP, EMC. And we hope that this will save lives and bring relief to communities, and that the parties will make progress at the negotiation table. We look forward to progress with regards to the dialogue process between the government and the group known as Segunda Marquetalia, as the parties are planning for a second round of talks soon. Our call to all the armed actors is to demonstrate a sincerity of commitment to peace by taking measures to protect civilians. Foremost among these is to cease the recruitment of minors. It is also of utmost importance for the viability of current and future peace processes that they respect the lives and the rights of former combatants and their families currently reintegrating into society. Madam President and members of the Council, as was highlighted during the holding of the General Assembly last month, the multidimensional challenges to peace and security in the world demand ever more innovative responses. In this respect, Colombia continues to provide valuable lessons and inspiration. Supporting Colombia's peace process is a privilege and a unique opportunity for the United Nations. First, because despite all they have endured and countless setbacks along the way, Colombians maintain an irrepressible vocation for the pursuit of peace through dialogue. We see this determination in authorities at all levels and across the society. Secondly, and while this remains a fully nationally owned peace process, Colombians have been incredibly receptive to this kind of support that the United Nations can provide. That carries with it a big responsibility. So let us continue then to do our absolute best to support Colombia along this challenging yet courageous road to peace.